Hi, my name is Mike Dobbs. This is 30 Minutes With, and today's guest is a good friend of mine who is enjoying some great national acclaim for his new documentary. So how did Doomed come about?
Mark Sykes, my executive producer, who I kind of grew up with in Springfield, I worked at his dad's comic book shop, so we were both comic book geeks. In the early 90s, Mark moved out to LA and ended up interning for Roger Corman. That was kind of my connection to Mark through the movie. And then, of course, I'm a comic book guy, so I love this stuff. And a couple of years ago, I figured, unless I do something, I don't think I'm going to get to the bottom of this, because I'd been waiting for a book to come out or waiting for a documentary to come out to find out the story. And I figured, what the heck, I'm going to do it myself. So I was going to write a book. He was interested and he wanted to work with me, but he's like, Marty, you're a filmmaker. Why aren't you, why don't you just make a documentary?
Sure.
And my initial concern was, well, it's illegal to watch this movie. It was never released. A bootleg floated out, and it's out there. I mean, you can go to YouTube and you can watch it right now if you want. But it's not legally available to view or to watch anywhere. So I figured anyway, if we can't show footage from the movie legally, how can I make this a documentary? And at some point we're just like, well, you know what? Screw it. We're just going to do it and see if anybody comes down on us. And, at each subsequent screening we've had, I kind of wait for, Marvel to show up. When we were premiering at San Diego Comic-Con, I was actually not overly concerned, but I was like, there could be a guy with a briefcase and a suit up there saying, cease and desist. But he wasn't, and they weren't.
And at the core of this is a German film producer who's now deceased, who had the rights to the Fantastic Four comic book and had to make a movie by a certain date in order to maintain those rights for the future.
Exactly.
It must have been a huge challenge for these filmmakers to be able to tell this story in the best way they could within their time limit and their budget.
Right, and that was only that was almost the least of their worries, was doing this, because at the time that they were in post-production and editing, the push to produce this film and to make it kind of went away. And there was nobody kind of steering the ship at this point, because the German company, it turns out, was mostly only interested in maintaining this option. Corman, shot the movie, he got paid, everybody got paid. It's not like anybody got completely ripped off, but it just languished in post-production, the film. So yeah, they were struggling to make these special effects of Johnny Storm flaming on and Sue Storm turning invisible, and especially the stretchy guy, Mr. Fantastic. But while they were struggling with all these effects, they were also not being supported by the studio, by Corman, because they were just kind of, we did what we had to do. We'll eventually release it, but it didn't seem to be on a very high priority because of all these kind of backdoor shenanigans that were going on. And because of this Corman film back in '92, it worked. The ploy kind of worked. They were able to maintain the option. So Constantine went on to produce and distribute the first two Fantastic Four movies, as well as the new one that just came out. During the credits it says, Constantine Films. If it wasn't for this, little Corman movie, they would have lost those rights and they wouldn't have made these hundreds of millions of dollars.
Did you find that they were embittered by this? Were they is this something they're still upset about?
Yeah, I'd say mostly no. They're professional actors. They got through it. It was, this little rocky road for a number of months in their early careers. But a couple of them too recognized that this could have been that breakout film, especially the director, Ole Sassoon. He put together a pretty good movie for very little money that was incredibly ambitious. So he did a nice job. And when the movie got shelved, the natural reaction and inclination for people to think is that, oh, it must suck so bad that it's unreleasable, which reflected badly on everybody that made it. So Ole went through years of, you must not be a very good director if this movie never came out. And this movie hurt him. He still actively works. He's a director. He's got credits. But Ole got screwed. And when it comes to the cast, there's this thing called residuals where, they get paid each time that the movie gets shown somewhere, whether it's on TV or it gets released on DVD or Blu-ray or video on demand. So they never kind of saw those profits that, when people when actors go into a movie production, they know, okay, if I'm getting, in this case, they got like $2,000 a week or something, whatever the SAG minimum was. They know that, okay, yeah, I'll get a check for $2,000, but in 6 months, when it gets released at the theaters, I get another check for $2,000. And when it comes out on home video, I get a check for $6,000. And when it gets released on cable, I get a check for $1,500. So they base their film choices on the property's potential to make money, in the long run. Fantastic Four didn't have that, so they got paid their $2,000, but they got screwed in the long run.
Sure, sure.
And in terms of them kind of being bitter, I recognized when I was doing the edit that I wanted this documentary to kind of celebrate the movie. I didn't want kind of a gritty, sad sob, edgy story about these broken people who never recovered from.
Right.
And that actually wasn't the case, but there were a couple of them and elements of their lives where we touched on a nerve. About how they really felt shafted with this movie. They thought it was going to be their big step into Hollywood, and it wasn't. And it certainly didn't help their careers. And like I said with Oli, people just assumed it sucked, so it quite possibly hurt their careers.
Do you think that it may spur an official release of this 1994 Fantastic Four film?
Yeah, I mean that wasn't the intent with the movie. I mean, I didn't make this movie for that to happen.
Right.
But if our movie were to be kind of super successful, it would raise awareness for this little movie that never got released. And at some point, the people who own it are going to say, we might be able to exploit this property, this little thing that is sitting on a shelf somewhere, decaying in a negative vault. Let's re-release it. Let's put it out on DVD. Let's make it a special feature on a future Fantastic Four release or something. That would be amazing. That would be, holy moly, that would be, if that were to happen, like I felt like if I were to be partly responsible for this, that would be the golden ring. That would be something that would be amazing. I'd love it to happen, but I don't expect it to.
Folks, you need to see this film. Even if you're not a big comic book fan, if you're a mystery fan, you're going to love it because it works on several different levels as a documentary. It's a great film. Marty's done a great job. His partner, Mark Sykes, has done a great job. And thanks so much for coming in.
Oh, man,
and talking.
thank you, Mike. That's great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.